Hi, everyone. Why don't we go ahead and get started? My name is Heather Zatto. I work in marketing for KinderCare. I will be the host of this webinar today. Before we get started, I just wanted to let you know that this is the second in a series of three family conversations that we're hosting. The first one was last Friday. It was about COVID-19. And this week, we're talking about helping your child bridge the pandemic learning gap. Next week, same time, we'll be talking about strategies for easing your child's anxiety. So we're excited you're here today for the second in our series. Few housekeeping items. Due to the large number of attendees, you are muted and your videos are off, but we encourage you to use that Q&A function. Please drop a question in at any time during the presentation, and we'll leave time at the end to answer those questions. And if you miss any part of this discussion, or if you missed last week's, or if you missed next week's, we will be recording all of them and sharing them out at the end. So today I would like to introduce you to our two speakers, Jordan-Downs and Taunya Banta.
All right, good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Jordan-Downs, and I lead our education programs team at KinderCare. And we are responsible for building our curriculum content for our infants through all the way up to school agers, as well as the professional development experiences for our teachers and our incredible inclusion services team that Taunya leads, which I'll let her share a little more about. I'm also the mom of two boys. I have Knox, who is 10 and in 4th grade, and Niall, who is 7 and in 1st grade. And I'm living this very real pandemic learning gap life alongside everyone else. So I'm excited to talk today a little bit about what this big issue is and how we can tackle it together.
Well, I am Taunya Banta. Like Kate mentioned, I lead our inclusion services team at KinderCare. Before that, I was actually a teacher in KinderCare centers, as well as some other community preschool programs. And then I also taught in elementary schools too. So about 9 years ago, I had the opportunity to come join the inclusion services team at KinderCare, where now I have the privilege of really just working alongside all of our teachers as they do the really meaningful work of creating classrooms and center communities where all of our kids and all of our families just feel really welcome and seen and valued for who they are and what they bring to our communities. So it's a dream job. Aside from that, I too am also a mom. I have a 2-year-old son, Lou. And so while distance learning isn't necessarily the space where I'm seeing concerns about pandemic and social distancing show up, I am a little bit worried about him and who he's going to be as a result of only really interacting with us and our family. So I'm just really excited to be here today and talk with all of you. Yeah, shall we get started?
Yeah, let's do it. So just quickly to kind of give you an idea of what we're going to cover and focus on, we have heard learning loss, learning gap, whatever phrase you hear out in your world, we're hearing it for sure in ours. And it's something that we know is a significant concern for families and educators. And so we're really trying to think differently and innovatively about it, but also in a balanced way that kind of puts that in context with all of the other things that are going on in the world. And I think that there has been times where we think of learning loss just in that school age space, but to Tanya's point, there's some other places and gaps where we might be feeling it too, especially if our kids were in care or socializing with other children before we kind of went into that period of isolation. So across all of the kind of areas that we're going to talk about today, we'll be translating up and down that developmental continuum of very little people into our school age world. And we're going to share a little bit about what we've heard from our families and from all of you about what the big concerns are, and also talk a little bit about what we can do as families in the home, things that we can do to help kind of bridge that gap at home with our children, as well as share a little bit about what we're doing at KinderCare, how we've changed and evolved some of our practices and programs to meet the need of this really unique experience in time that we're in. And we don't quite know the impact of yet, because it's emerging research. We're just kind of coming up on that year mark right now. And it's going to be interesting to see what we learn 6 months down the road and what the impact is. But how we can also, as a community of teachers and families, work together to help bridge some of the gaps that may come up. And then we'll kind of close out with some ways that we're all in it together and can continue to be a support, and obviously have a question and answer session. So that's what you can expect from our time together. And as Heather mentioned, that cute question and answer function is there, so use it liberally. But first, we'll just kind of start with what we've heard from our families around the pandemic learning gap or the learning loss concern. And they kind of fall into two big buckets. Universally, regardless of how old the children are, the thing that we hear over and over again is a concern about their child's social and emotional development, and some of the skills that they're either not getting the chance to practice anymore, or they feel like maybe regressing just because they're not with their peers in the same way that they used to be. And we've also heard the very real concern about what developmentally they might be missing along the way. If you were in a program and that was kind of very clear what milestones and support you were getting and the learning journey your children are on. And, then we all go into this 4-wall space that we've been operating in, whether your child's young or older, there's a learning gap, a catch-up concern that we all have. And it's something that we're continuing to think through and keep an eye on and work on, but also to be realistic about where that fits in the whole life of a child, and how we don't over amplify it and keep them in a really resilient space. So those are kind of the big things. Like, is my kid going to be behind? And are there social or emotional skills that they're not developing yet, or they're kind of regressing on? And so we'll talk a little bit about both of those things over the course of our time together, both what we can do in the home and what we're doing at KinderCare. But I wanted to frame it with some context and maybe a little different angle, because we do hear that learning loss is real. It's something to be concerned about, and we should be paying really close attention to it. But what we also need to pause and recognize and look at is that this generation of children is going through an unprecedented experience. And while there are a lot of things that have been super hard and have caused concern and just like some inconsistency in what their experiences are, there are also things that are really unique that they're getting out of this period of time that we're not measuring on a test, but that will be hugely impactful in their life as they move forward. And one of those things is just understanding like the scope of this great big world that we live in and their place in it. You think about kind of all of the things we were going through in initial phases of COVID, and whether it was washing our hands better or wearing masks or keeping your distance. And what that does for a child is help them connect to the fact that like what they do and the choices that they make matter to the kind of health of our community and the collective good. And that really strengthens like their own identity in a unique way that we obviously work to do as families and as teachers every day, but that we had a really real life experience to kind of help play that out. And that's a benefit that we don't want to forget. The other is just the practice that they're getting, that resilience, and that we're all getting at being resilient. We've had to bob and weave and be agile and change direction. And all that routine and schedule kind of stuff went out the window. And that's a little like disorienting for kids. It's certainly challenging for adults, but as we've worked our way through it, it gave them opportunity to really practice that flexibility that is a skill that will serve them well for the rest of their lives, and in a pretty major way through just the experiences that we've been having. So that resilience piece is a good, like something that they're learning that won't necessarily be a gap. And finally, just the independence that a lot of our children are stepping into, regardless of age. I think all of us grownups are doing I'm doing the very best I can. You're trying to wear all of your hats and be good in all of the places out of, your one home environment. And there's probably been a feeling at some point of not quite showing up in the way that you would want to, or fully. But they're watching us. They're seeing how we're navigating through it, and they're understanding what they can do independently and how that's helpful and how they're a part of this family structure, because they want to be helpers too. So there are these great three things that, although we want to pay attention to what their growth is and their losses are, there have been some really cool gains if we pause long enough to take a look at what they've had the opportunity to experience alongside all of us. So Tanya, I don't know if you wanted to tag anything in there, but I just wanted to kind of reframe learning loss a little bit in this space.
Yeah, no, I think you said it beautifully, Kate. And the thing I was just thinking is, it's also the extra time that we have all had together that we probably wouldn't have had otherwise. And I know I hear people say that a lot, and oftentimes I'm kind of in a space where I'm like, what I would like is less time with my family right now. I would like a little time to myself. But when I look at the big picture, it really is just a gift in a lot of ways. And I think will just strengthen those, hopefully already strong family bonds that we have. And that's something that's going to be lasting and enduring. So, looking at the bright side.
Absolutely. And while keeping the bright side is always super helpful for everybody's mental health, and we want to stay focused on things that we can have gratitude for, there are some real things that we as families want to show up for our children with, and that we're concerned about. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we can do at home and that you all can do at home that will help with those big academic or developmental learning gap concerns, or those social emotional ones. So we're going to pivot into that and think about how we can build a bridge for this gap, this chasm that we're all feeling. And Tanya and I are going to kind of tackle this from two different lenses here, because I'm a school age mom, right? And I have a very different experience than what she has as mom of a little one, of a toddler. But these are kind of the top three things that we have found to be the most helpful, and that like we have some sort of control and influence within our own environments to help with that bridge we're talking about. And the first one is just around like creating this positive family culture. And that may sound like flowery and rainbows, but when you get down to it, what we're really talking about is like, how are we connecting with one another in this new way? Where, we're talking, in my family, for example, like, this is what I need to feel respected, or this is what I need to feel supported with my distance learning, or when I'm on a webinar, or, when we're going through a day where it's really cold and we can't go outside and my body needs to move, what we can do to kind of set a culture of communication and connection, even when it's around the hard stuff, is really helpful for our children, because they're getting the chance to express their needs, but they're also hearing from us as grownups what we need. And like, it creates this sense of we're all in this together, even if it's just our little family hunkered down trying to figure it out. So Tanya, from a toddler mom perspective, since Lou isn't going to probably rattle off what he needs to feel respected or supported,
we're working on it.
I mean, that'd be brilliant, but
I'm working on it personally.
For sure.
Yeah, I think for our family, one of the biggest things has just been routines, because, like Kate mentioned early on, our life has just been kind of a series of constant changes. And I think, that can feel stressful for everyone, even a 2-year-old too. And while, he may not have the language right now to articulate that to us and tell us exactly what he needs, we can see it in his behaviors, whether that's, not sleeping as well at night, way more meltdowns, just kind of being clingy. All of those things have been an indicator for us that like he's feeling this too. And so when we think about just what we can do to make our life and our home a positive place for all of us, routines have just been a game changer for us. And so, a lot of that is just keeping them as consistent as possible, because I think for Lou as a toddler, they don't have a lot of control over their day to day. And so when they have a really good sense internally of like, okay, I know this is what's going to happen next, it gives them that sense of autonomy, and just like they know what to expect. And I think it kind of decreases some of the feelings and stress they may have that was contributing to some of those other more difficult behaviors. So yeah, I think routines have been big for us. And then for me too, it's really helpful because, I've got a lot of things to do, and mom guilt can creep in, and I can start to like think that I'm dropping the ball on the parent end. And so if in that routine, I'm also being really intentional about the time that I'm spending with him, it's good for both of us. Yeah, that's what's been helpful for our family.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. And I think, no matter, how big or what age your children are or your family is, that focus and kind of what both Taunya and I shared goes back to that underlying need and concern that we hear from families when it comes to this learning gap around socialization and feeling connected. And so this is just creating that positive family culture is just one of those ways you can support in that particular space. The other things, that I mentioned earlier, just in terms of the learning loss topic that's on everyone's mind, is kind of like, okay, what does that mean? And where do I even focus on that? And the big places that whether you're 2 or 10, we know are really critical to development and over time is the language and literacy, right? Those communication skills, those early literacy skills, as well as some of those math and STEM mindsets that have a very clear sequence, right? In how children learn it and how they progress, and where that concern comes from for all of us, because we feel like they're missing a part of their learning in that sequence. And so how do we fill that gap a little bit? And from a language and literacy space, I think, communication can show up in so many different ways. So even just what Taunya was sharing about some of even the routine things that you do with your children, just talking to them, modeling conversation, engaging them in conversation, that's not just helping them feel better about their connection with you or that socialization piece, but it's also strengthening those communication skills. And from a literacy standpoint, one of the things that we've done at my house, and that is kind of just a natural part of our world anyway, is story time, right? Like we're reading at night, the usual, but you can only read certain books or certain stories so many times before somebody starts to get bored or over it. And for the 7 and 10-year-old that I have, we also have a lot of debates on which book we're going to read. So something that we did to try it out just to make it a little more fun was like, let's have a family book club, and let's, Knox is going to have his 4th grade reader that, that's appropriate for him, and he can read aloud to us. Niall's not quite there yet, so mom's going to read, and we can do that together, and we can ask questions in the story, talk about what's going on, name characters, right? Like there are so many different learning possibilities in the very simple and natural childhood experience of story time that really will help keep that baseline foundational literacy skill development place strong. So when they are back in school, or if they're back in care, they have something that they're building off of. So that's how we kind of tackle literacy at my house. How about with Lou?
Yeah. Well, we're not doing a book club. Shock.
No. Okay.
But I think one of the things that has been helpful for us, because, again, we're kind of just stuck in our house. And so like, there's just that sort of feeling of Groundhog Day, like all our toys are the same, all our books are the same, everything is the same always, has been to bring out a handful of books. It's usually like 5 or so books that I'll bring out. He has this typical book basket, but then we have, he has older cousins who we get all their hand-me-downs from. So we have just a ton of books. And I'll pick, just a few, maybe once every week or two, and bring them down. And the way that I've done it is I'll just have them set up where he eats breakfast, so he can see, there's these new books that we get to add to like our collection and read. And then I just kind of keep swapping them out so that, again, it's just sort of new and fresh, and it's an easy way to build some excitement around it and get him into it. And, much like Kate said, it's just a really easy opportunity when we're reading books together to, build his vocabulary. A lot of times I use it as an opportunity just to talk with him more about some of the things that are happening socially and emotionally for the characters in the book, since he's the only child right now, and doesn't have exposure to other kids really to play with. It's kind of an opportunity for us to just talk about those things together. And like I said, to just keep it fresh and exciting for him. I don't just do that with books. I've also found doing that with toys is really helpful too. Just in case there are families out there who are dying in a sea of plastic, with kids complaining that they have nothing to do. Just throw
that sounds familiar.
Most of the toys in the garage, and then bring in, like 5 or so to play with for the week, just again, to keep it fresh and new.
Yeah. And I think the other, sorry.
We can hear you.
Okay. The other thing too, that I think is like calling your backup. When you have a chance, like my mom asked me over and over again, like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to help. We can't be there. And I was like, can you just FaceTime with him for a little bit, talk to him, read him a book, right? Like engage your village as much as you can. And, there are, if you don't get access to a library, or it's difficult to get new books or new stories, like I have found that there are a wealth of free resources that you can find, of new stories, ebooks, that you can use at home. And, depending on the number of minutes your child may or may not have had on screen time that day, you might find somebody who can read a book, right? Like to them in story time. So I think obviously the best is to be connected to a human where there's that back and forth conversation. But this is reality, and we're all trying to make it through it. And so there's a lot of different ways that you can get access to really cool stories and books, and engage in a different way when it can't be you. Or you can't get to the library or get Amazon to deliver something on time. So that's kind of a way at home to focus on language and literacy, which we know are really, really important and foundational skills for any learning and development gap that might happen. But the other is kind of in that cognitive STEM math space. And what's cool about that is kids are wired and natural little scientists and curiosity people. So when we think about kind of big things like math or science, we tend to go to maybe what our own educational experiences are. But sometimes it's just those new ideas that they're telling you every 5 minutes. And it means they're problem solving. They're thinking about something. We call it STEM mindsets, right? Where they're trying to figure something new out. It could be practicing some of those critical thinking skills. And I would for me, it's just kind of encouraging that. I try to do it by letting, the boys will engineer something. I'll give them a bunch of like recyclable things and they can make whatever they want, or they work together to solve a problem and they're collaborating. I'll get back to you when I've hit the sweet spot on that one. That's hit or miss sometimes. But those are the good, some of the STEM mindsets, at least from a school age perspective, that will be really helpful in keeping them, keeping their brains sharp so that when they're back in it, they can grow.
I think the same is true for me. Most of it, the thing I try to focus on the most is, just because Lou's language is still developing, it can be really easy to get into a space where I'm sort of talking to him and asking him questions that only require a yes or no answer. And so I try to be really mindful of asking him more open-ended questions so that he kind of thinks through things and needs, has the time to articulate for himself, whatever the answer to the question is. I find, just an easy example, he loves to play basketball. And so, if the ball is somewhere where he can't reach and he's asking me to get it rather than just getting it for him, I also will say, hey, how could you get that? Like, what could we do? Well, you can't reach it from there. So now what do we do? And just giving him that opportunity to really explore and figure it out for himself versus just, getting the ball for him. Yeah.
Awesome. So those are kind of the top 3 things that can really strengthen and keep those foundational skills in place, and that are good opportunities for you at home. And the same way we're thinking about it as families, we're thinking really hard about it at KinderCare. And as we were welcoming a lot of our children back, it's been kind of gradual and over, since last May through now, we're continuing to be able to welcome families back. We had to think a little differently about how we were going to make sure that they felt safe and secure and supported, as well as our teachers. And so we're continuing to just evolve the type of programming and experiences that we offer that are unique to this particular moment in time, but are also just really good best practices that we get the chance to amplify in a different way. And they fall in 3 main buckets, which is kind of nurturing relationships and making sure that emotional connection and social interaction feels really strong, as well as kind of growing what they know and hitting on some of the learning loss concerns that we know are out there and that are real, and extending experiences, right, that they already have in our classroom with activities to focus on those literacy skills a little longer, on those STEM skills and executive function, problem solving skills. And then finally, just really looking differently at how we help them understand like their role in the world and feel connected. It's been a lot of isolation. And so how do we create connection amongst the children, amongst the communities that we happen to sit in, and do that in a fun and engaging way. So those are kind of the big overarching themes that we've shifted around. And Tanya, I don't know if you would talk just briefly about the relationships piece and why that's such a critical first step for us as families return.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think you mentioned this earlier, Kate, too, but, when we think about helping our kids catch up, on some of the more maybe academic things like language and literacy and, STEM and all of that great stuff, we know that the first thing that is most important is just helping kids feel safe. And, a way to help kids feel safe is to make sure that they have really strong relationships in their life. So that's, obviously the relationships they have with teachers. That's also helping them to learn how to be with each other, with their peers again, and connect with each other. Because, if they're so preoccupied with, if they're not feeling safe in that space, that's going to take up some of that precious brain space they need to dive into some of these more academic areas. And so if we can alleviate that for them, just help them feel really, I'm going to say safe again, safe, then we know that they're going to be in a better space to learn. So that's why, that is one of our first areas that we focus on.
Can I jump in because there's a question that came in related to this, Tanya, which someone who said, what are your recommendations for helping young children who have spent more than half of their lives in quarantine? How do they transition to that childcare setting? I think it's related to what you were just talking about with socialization. And
yeah. I mean, that is my son's story too. And I think, you know, it's sort of the little things every day, I think. So we have been really mindful of when we're out on walks in the neighborhood. We model for Lou what it looks like to talk to people. Because, you know, at first it was like when you saw people on the street, you cross to the other side of the street, people are wearing masks, and like that is what Lou knows as normal. And so it's helping him understand, you know, really that's not normal, and how we, you know, just say hi and talk and visit and are friendly with folks. And, you know, at home too, making sure that we're connecting virtually with other people, that he knows who they are, he understands and sees what it's like to connect with people. In terms of returning to the center, I think, you know, that is one of the things I think our centers are really great at is when you connect with them, they are going to have a conversation with you about who your child is, because not every child is the same, right? And so they're going to talk with you to understand, you know, who your child is, what your concerns are, and will really be able to help tailor a plan for you and your family to make that transition as easy as possible. So I know one of the things I've done is started to read books about school and what that looks like. I also read books about, you know, what it means when, you know, mom might have to go, you know, we'll go to school and then mom's going to leave. You'll stay there and play with your friends, and then mom will come back. If you feel sad, you know, these are some of the things you can do. You'll have your blanket there. You'll have a teacher who can help you. And just sort of rehearsing those things ahead of time can be really helpful too. But I would definitely, I think probably my number one thing would be to make sure that you are connecting with the director at the center you're looking at going to, because they will really be able to help you tailor a plan that's specific for you and your child.
Awesome. Real briefly, also for any school age parents are out there, we know the big beast of distance learning has been a part of our reality. And it was something that we wanted to make sure we were supporting as best we could at KinderCare. And so we put a lot of effort into creating some guidance for our school age teachers to be able to offer that side-by-side support in our school age classrooms to the kids who are enrolled in that K-12 space and have Chromebooks and schedules and all kinds of things going on. And to also continue to pull through the thread that Taunya just talked about earlier, with making sure that the environment is set up and the connections are there so that they are able to engage in kind of this new way of learning that can feel a little unsettling, because they know they have a community that's really supportive and friends that are going through the same thing with them. So just trying to be that safe space where a kid can be themselves, right, and get the support that they need, and making sure our teachers have the right guidance for this very new learning model that we're all trying to figure out, as well as some cool projects that we can get the kids engaged in that will be fun and that they can have their own voice and choice in, but are building really critical resilience skills that will serve them well when they do return to school full time and things look different once again, and kind of that ongoing change. So those are kind of the big areas we focused on in school age. And we're intentional about kind of putting some framing in for our teachers around trauma-informed care, because we are all going kind of through a very collective trauma in this moment. And there's some specific strategies that they're able to use to help meet children where they are, as well as making sure there's a really clear anti-bias education lens in the work that we're doing. There's a lot that happened in 2020 that our children have absorbed in some way. And it is our responsibility to not skirt around that, but to be prepared to help support children in making sense of everything that's going on. And we look at just the racial landscape of what has occurred and what they're seeing and what they're absorbing. Our responsibility is to make sure they're walking into the most inclusive environment possible, and that we're helping our teachers get stronger in how to offer that and meet families where they are based on the experiences that they've had. So I know we've dropped a lot on you here, and I hope that it's been helpful. I think that, when Taunya and I were talking about this and kind of the messages that we wanted to make sure rang through, we're still in it, right? Like, it would be really great. I can't wait till the day when we can, like, with full declaration, say we are out of it, but we are all still in it in varying ways. But we are in this together. And, there is this idea that we've heard, over many years of the whole, it takes a village, and, it might look a little, our villages might look a little different or a little smaller these days, but even in the midst of isolation, being able to latch on to one another and support one another is really important. And I'm really fortunate to work with Taunya, but to also call her a friend and a part of a village where we're able to be that mental health space that we need sometimes in conversation, or share what's going on, share ideas about what's going on. But like, you're doing great. We're all doing great. Like, it is really hard to imagine that, because I know that we all think about the things we're not getting quite right, but the love, the patience, like just that togetherness time is something that's making a really positive impact on our children, even in the midst of something that's really difficult. So that was one of the big messages. I think, Taunya, you were going to talk a little bit of just about, like, we're here when you're ready.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've talked a little bit about it, but, one of the things that it's going to be obviously different for every family, but when you do decide you're ready, we're here. we know what it's like. Obviously, not all of us, but most of us have kids too. So we're right there with you. We understand your concerns. And like I said, I would just encourage you to reach out to your centers, because you're not going to be in it alone. We all know where you're coming from, and we're here to help you get back into it in the way that feels best for your family. Yeah.
And like, certainly the big thing that's on all of our minds is like this idea of safety, right? Like, how is it safe? Will it be okay? And that is our top priority, whether it's the physical safety of our children or the emotional safety of our children. It is something that we are being guided by experts in the field in all of those areas, and making sure that we're building into our programs as a part of our DNA. So just having the confidence that, you're bringing your child to a place that their health, their physical safety, and their heart and their emotional safety are going to be cared for, is one of those things that I know I needed to hear and understand as a parent. And I'm sure a lot of you do as well. So just remember, you're not alone in this, and that you have us, and I'm sure you have lots of other people around you that you can tap into.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So it looks like we have a few questions here. Okay. So this one says that she's noticed that her 4-year-old grandson's speech has regressed since not attending KinderCare for the last year. Looking for any advice to help, tips, tools, speech therapy, all of that good stuff. I'll jump in.
Go for it. Okay. Sounds right up your alley.
Yeah. I mean, I guess so. So yeah, I would say that if you do have concerns, my recommendation would be to reach out to your child's pediatrician, your grandson's pediatrician, because they're really going to be able to help you assess, whether or not this is, typical for your grandson's age, or if this is something that maybe he might need a little bit more support on, whether that's speech therapy or whatever else it may be. But aside from that, I think, some of the tips that we talked about just with reading, I mean, that's a really easy way to just give your child a little bit more exposure to language and to communication. I think too, if it's showing up in a way where maybe you're not sure if your grandson is understanding when you're talking with him, using different visual aids and pictures to help foster that communication can be helpful. So, maybe if it's, you know, you're talking about, you know, what you're going to do next. Maybe you have a little picture that says, you know, right now we're eating lunch and it's a picture of food, and next we're going to go play outside and there's a picture of outside. I mean, I know that's maybe a little bit more classroom specific, but hopefully that gives you an idea of ways that you can use images to help support spoken language. So yeah, I hope that's helpful. Okay, so another question is, I am noticing that my daughter, who's 3.5 years old, keeps following what other kids do in KinderCare. What is the best way to talk to her about it and get her out of this habit? So I'm assuming that maybe this is a habit that you're not too thrilled with since you don't want her to do it anymore. And that is, I would just assure you too, that age is an age where it's totally normal. You know, whether they were getting it from KinderCare or somewhere else. But, you know, obviously too, it's really important that your family's values are, you know, showing up in your child in the ways that you want to see them and that your child understands those. And so, you know, at 3.5 years old, a great way is to just honestly have conversations with them about it. So let's say maybe, you're finding that your child is, you know, I don't know, like arguing more with you than you would typically like to see. Like you ask them to do something and they say no, and kind of have a little bit of a meltdown. I think, you know, one of the things that you can do is talk about, you know, different characters in books that you're reading and point out examples of when characters are listening to each other and talking to each other in ways that match what you would like to see in your family. Sometimes it's easier for kids to comprehend something that's happening to someone else versus in themselves first. So when they can identify it out there, then they can start to translate it for themselves. So, you know, talking again about characters in books, I think too, one of the things we tend to do as parents quite a bit, and it's just a natural tendency, I think, is to give a lot of attention to the behaviors we don't want to see. So, you know, maybe we're saying, stop, I don't like that, don't do that, punishing it, whatever it may be. And while I'm certainly not saying don't address those behaviors when you see them, what I would recommend and find is more helpful is to give lots of attention to the behaviors that you do want to see. So over exaggerate the times when you see them doing the things that you want them to do, because that tends to be really encouraging for kids and they want to do those things more versus, you know, maybe some of the other behaviors you're trying to get rid of. So I would say just be mindful of that and try to give lots and lots and lots of praise and attention to the things that you do want to see. Next question here. This looks like a good one for you, Kate. Okay. What kind of professional development or training are you offering your teachers to be able to really help your young children catch up to some learning loss or adjust socially and emotionally after this unprecedented time?
Yeah, it's a great question. So a couple of things. I think one that I touched on briefly before was the type of guidance that we're giving in new programming that helps our teachers understand the needs. We'll start with the social emotional part as they're re-entering, how to kind of keep a pulse on the needs of children as they're coming back, and that connection and ways to offer those experiences naturally throughout the day, but just with a little more focus. Because whether they're a brand new child or whether they're returning, there's been some interruption in that relationship, and we care for that first and focus on that first, because we know once that's kind of something that a child feels comfortable and supported in, it makes the catch-up part a lot easier. And we've also built out really good learning experiences and guidance for our teachers around how to take the things that are already happening throughout the day, whether it's an activity they already had planned or part of a transition or just something during outdoor time, and find those key developmental skills based on the age group that they have that extends that language and literacy experience or exposure, or kind of adds on and layers on top of the math or critical thinking experiences that they're having. And so there's a lot of different activities that we've been able to help guide our teachers through, as well as just the right mindset and strategy as teachers in terms of how you extend it and keep them engaged. Because depending on how old they are, there's a certain attention span we're dealing with here. And we want to make sure that it feels like a natural part of what they're going through. Really quickly, just our teachers also have ongoing professional development days, and we've been able to do those virtually and create that digitally. And one of the things we just recently did in February was focus on how they use the developmental profiles that we have as part of our learning tools to see where a child is on a continuum and identify what are the skills that are either right below or right above that you're pushing your child to in the next level, or maybe revisiting just to make sure they are reinforced, as well as taking a look at how that will be unique in pace as well. Just understanding who your child is and where their strengths lie and where their opportunities are. So we're trying to hit them from every angle we have, because the confidence of that teacher is critical, and we want to make sure they're armed with the right resources.
Yeah, we're just at about, well, we're a little bit over time, so we'll maybe do one more question, Tanya, and then
sure. Yeah. So we have one that says, I've noticed my child's meltdowns and willingness to listen regress significantly since our center closed. Any tips? I think.
Go ahead, Tanya, sorry.
Yeah, no, I just feel like I've been talking a lot. So, yeah, I think, as I mentioned with my own son, some of the ways that it typically shows up when kids are feeling, stressed or anxious, or just are kind of responding to all of the change that's happened, no matter how big or small. It often shows up in their behavior, and behaviors like these. So I think, one of the things that's been most difficult for me, but also probably the most helpful for me, is to remember for myself to not take it personally, not put it on myself as a parent, and also to not get mad at my child for being so difficult when I just need him to listen or do a thing and not make a big production of it. I think so much of it is just your own mindset. That is the place I would start first. You're doing a great job. You're not doing anything wrong as a parent. This is just typical in how your child is responding probably to all the change, or honestly, just being, I can't remember if you said 2 or 3, but that's also really typical for their age and healthy. So just, try to remember that you're a great parent and be as patient as you can, because I know for myself, as soon as I take it up to the next level and show my frustration, my son is like, aha, I got her. And it's all downhill from there. We just try to see who can outdo each other. So as much as possible, stay calm, even if that means you just need to take a second. And if you do end up, like I have on occasion, losing your, you're still a good parent. It's actually a really great opportunity to be able to go back to your child afterwards and be like, hey, remember when mom did that thing? I shouldn't have done that. This is what I should have done instead. I'm sorry. I will try harder next time. Because that's exactly what we're trying to teach our kids to be able to do too. So great learning opportunity. And, otherwise, I think it goes back to, I would, say, just kind of look at your day-to-day and see where you can find ways to keep things consistent for your child. So that, again, if this is maybe because of just some anxiety from all the change, it'll give him that sense of control over his environment, or at least the illusion of it. And then, I think too, just kind of helping him name the emotion. I won't bore you with all the brain science behind it, but what it does show us is that by simply being able to name emotions, it actually decreases all of those like stress hormones and stuff in their brain significantly. So as simple as it may seem, just talking with him saying, gosh, you seem really frustrated right now. What can I do to help you? And then, you know, being able to brainstorm together will actually go a long way. So I feel like I could keep talking to you about this.
Well, actually,
like a personal line.
It's a good segue because next week you'll be talking again. We have another webinar next week, another family conversation about anxiety. And you know, the pandemic has created a lot of stress and anxiety, not just for adults, but for kids. And so you two will be back to talk about how to recognize signs of stress and anxiety in your children and some tips for handling that.
Really looking forward to it.
So Kate and Tanya, thank you so much for talking with us today. I always find it incredibly helpful. I have 2 kids of my own and I love to hear from you guys. And so we will be back next Friday, same time. Hope to see you all there. And thanks again, Tanya and Kate. Have a good day.
Thank you. This is great.
Have a great weekend.
Ring, ring.